In 1935, a Japanese philosopher described the state your brain enters when you do your best creative work. He had no fMRI, no neuroscience lab, just 10 years of Zen practice and one of the sharpest philosophical minds of the 20th century. He called it Kōiteki Chokkan, acting intuition. 60 years later, the brain scans proved him right. And what those brain scans revealed, combined with what this philosopher understood in a study in Kyoto almost a century ago, changes how you think about creative work. Maybe that's about your photography or your art or your writing, about what you're actually doing when you're at your best. This is a follow-up to my video on Nishida Kitarō, but you don't have to have seen it. You can watch that after. What matters today is one concept, and what it means for how you create. If you saw the last video, you'll remember that he was not an easy thinker. He was the founder of the Kyoto School of Philosophy, Japan's most original modern philosopher. A man who spent a decade doing Rinzai Zen practice, sitting with koans, dissolving the distinction between subject and object. And then he spent the rest of his life trying to put that experience into rigorous philosophical language. He failed. In the best possible way. The ideas kept expanding. The problem Nishida kept returning to was this. How do we know things that we can't reach by thinking? The artist who tries to explain how they made something great often can't. The master craftsman works in ways that exceed their own verbal description. The Zen archer releases the arrow not when he decides to, but when it decides. This isn't poetic exaggeration or mysticism. It's a genuine philosophical problem. Knowledge that lives in the body, in action, in the doing. What is it? How does it work? And more importantly, how do we get access to it? Nishida's answer was Kōiteki Chokkan, acting intuition. The concept works like this. Ordinarily, we think of knowing and doing as separate. First, you understand something. Then you act on it. First, you see the shot. Then you press the shutter. First, you think the thought. Then you speak it. Nishida said, no. That separation is a fiction. A story the thinking mind tells about itself after the fact. In real, deep, skilled engagement with the world, intuiting and acting are a single moment. You see by acting. You know through doing. The artist doesn't first envision the work and then produce it. The work and the artist are formed simultaneously, in the act itself. And crucially, for both artist and work to be fully formed, the separation between inner and outer must collapse. What's outside is inside, and vice versa. The camera is not a tool the photographer holds. The garden isn't a space the designer enters. In the deepest moments of creative work, there's no one holding. There is only the holding. This, Nishida argued, is not a special state. It's the original form of human experience. The thinking, observing, self-conscious mind is the overlay. Acting tuition is what's underneath. Now, fast forward 40 years, we're in Chicago, not Kyoto. A Hungarian-American psychologist named Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. And yes, I'll say the name slowly. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi has spent decades interviewing artists, athletes, surgeons, chess players, mountain climbers. He's asking them one question. When do you feel most alive? The answers across culture, across discipline, across age were remarkably consistent. They described moments of complete absorption, where the sense of effort vanished, where self-consciousness dropped away, where time either stopped or flew, where action and awareness were no longer two things, they were one. Csikszentmihalyi called this state flow. He published his research in 1990, The book was called Flow, The Psychology of Optimal Experience. It became one of the most influential psychology books of the 20th century. And here's the key description. Listen carefully because it'll sound familiar. In Flow, Csikszentmihalyi wrote, action and awareness merge. The sense of self vanishes. There's no gap between what you're doing and your awareness of doing it. Nishida called it Kōiteki Chokkan. Intuiting entails acting, and acting entails intuiting. The difference between internal and external collapses. Different language, different century, different tradition, but the same door. Csikszentmihalyi also identified something else critical. Flow is not random. It has conditions. It reliably appears at the intersection of two things. A challenge that slightly exceeds your current skill level and the skill to meet it. Too easy and the mind wanders. Too hard and anxiety takes over. In the narrow channel between boredom and fear, that's where flow lives. He also observed 9 consistent characteristics of the flow experience. Clear goals, unambiguous feedback, complete concentration, the merging of action and awareness, the loss of self-consciousness, time distortion, effortlessness, a sense of control, and the experience being intrinsically rewarding, worth having for its own sake, not as a means to something else, the experience itself as the point. 20 years after Csikszentmihalyi named flow, the neuroscientists caught up. Stephen Kotler, best-selling author and founder of the Flow Research Collective, where I studied at, spent years synthesizing the research and mapping what actually happens in the brain when flow occurs. The picture that emerged was striking. When you enter flow, a specific part of the brain quiets down, the prefrontal cortex, the seed of self-monitoring, self-criticism, self-narration, and analytical judgment temporarily reduces its activity. This is called transient hypofrontality. Transient is temporary. Hypofrontality is reduced activity in the frontal lobe. Think about what the prefrontal cortex actually does. It's the part of you that says, am I doing this right? What will people think? That wasn't good enough. Try again. Analysis, judge, compare. It's the inner critic, the observer, the self-conscious narrator of your own experience. In flow, it goes quiet. And in its absence, something else becomes possible. Kotler describes it as selflessness, one of the 4 defining characteristics of peak experience, alongside timelessness, effortlessness, and richness. Sometimes we call them stir. The sense of self literally dissolves, and with the critic offline, the brain floods with neurochemicals. Dopamine, norepinephrine, anandamide, serotonin, endorphins. A cocktail that increases focus, pattern recognition, lateral thinking, and the ability to make connections that the conscious, analytical mind would ordinarily filter out. This is what Nishida's philosophy was pointing at. When he said that in acting intuition, there is no fundamental distinction between internal and external. When he wrote that intelligent bodily action unfolds without the slightest crack for thinking to enter, he was describing philosophically what Kotler's neuroscience now shows us in brain scans. The critic goes quiet. The self dissolves. The body acts from a deeper knowledge than the thinking mind can access. Nishida in 1935, the fMRI in 2008, the same phenomenon, 80 years apart. Now I want to show you 3 specific places where Nishida's acting intuition and the flow state research converge, because each one has something to teach us about how we actually live and create. The first convergence, the death of the observer. Both Nishida and Csikszentmihalyi understood that the observer must step back for peak experience to occur. In Nishida's language, pure experience, the most fundamental form of reality, precedes the split between subject and object. Before I am aware that I am seeing, there is just seeing. The moment the observer steps forward and says, "I'm doing this," something is lost. In flow, Csikszentmihalyi called it loss of self-consciousness, not unconsciousness, not inattention, the opposite. Complete, total attention, but without the self-monitoring layer running on top. Kotler says it even more directly. In flow, selflessness isn't a side effect. It's a requirement. The inner narrator, the one comparing, judging, editing in real time, is precisely what disrupts the merger of action and awareness. The best photographs I've taken, I suspect this is true for you too, happened when I stopped thinking about taking a photograph. The second convergence, the body as the site of knowing. Nishida was emphatic about this. Acting intuition is not a mental achievement. It's a bodily achievement. The performance of an embodied individual acting in and forming the world. He wrote, "I am not a knowing body, but an acting body." This is a radical statement. It means your deepest knowledge doesn't live in your head. It lives in your hands, in your posture, in the accumulated history of every time you've done this before, stored not as a memory, but as capability. Kotler's research confirms it. Flow is most reliably found in activities with strong somatic engagement. Activities where the body is deeply involved. Action sports, music, craft, movement, the body in the world. This is why the Japanese do, the way, always manifests as a physical practice. Shodo, the way of calligraphy. Kendo, the way of the sword. Chado, the way of tea. The kanji for do, or michi, is path, or the way. The mastery isn't in thinking. It's in the repeated embodied act, until the act knows itself. The third convergence, and the most important one for how you actually live and create. You don't force the revelation, but you can build the door. Neither Nishida nor Csikszentmihalyi was a passive thinker. Both understood that acting intuition and flow don't arrive by accident, or rather, they arrive by design. And this is exactly what Shizen means. Remember, Shizen is not wilderness. It's not raw, untended nature. Shizen is cultivated naturalness. Artistic intent flowing with nature. The Japanese garden looks effortless because enormous care has been taken to make it so. The spontaneity is prepared for. Kotler identified over 20 flow triggers, specific conditions that reliably produce more flow. And when you understand them, they look less like a modern productivity hack and more like the design principles embedded in Japanese art practice for centuries. Clear goals. So the mind doesn't fragment, it converges. The tea ceremony has a clear goal. This bowl of tea, made well, offered sincerely. The photographic walk has a goal. The photographic walk has a clear goal. This light, this morning, these 40 minutes. Immediate feedback. The brushstroke either lands or it doesn't. The shutter either catches the moment or it misses. No ambiguity, no lag. The work tells you instantly what it needs. The challenge skills balance. The task must stretch you without overwhelming you. This is why masters keep seeking harder mountains. Not from ego, but because the body needs to be at the edge of its capability for acting intuition to engage. Rich environment. Novelty, complexity, unpredictability. Nature is the ultimate rich environment. This is why photography in nature produces flow so reliably. At least for me. Every light is different, every moment unrepeatable. The environment itself demands full presence and deep embodiment. Remove distraction. Put the phone down. Enter the practice. Let the body lead. Nishida spent a decade in Zen practice not because he was passive, but because he understood that you must train the body and quiet the analytical mind deliberately so that something deeper can operate. The discipline is what creates the freedom. Kotler puts it this way: flow follows focus, and focus is something we can engineer. The traditional Japanese arts have always known this. They just call it practice. Nishida said the artist and the work are formed simultaneously. You don't make the image and the photographer arrive together. Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi described flow as being completely involved in an activity for its own sake. The ego falls away. Nishida Kitarō described acting intuition as the moment when what is outside is inside, and vice versa. When the difference between self and world collapses into the pure activity of creation. 2 men, 2 centuries, 2 traditions, the same truth. The best of what we are capable of as photographers, as craftspeople, as artists and human beings moving through a world that deserves our full attention doesn't come from trying harder. It comes from building the conditions where trying becomes unnecessary. Design your environment. Honor your practice. Enter nature with an open body and a quiet mind. And then let it move through you. If you want to go deeper into the practical side of this, how to actually build flow into your photography and daily life, I put together a full roadmap. For photography, the quiet lens. For your life, Shizen style flow. The links are in the description. And if this video gave you something worth thinking about, share it with someone who creates. Because I believe this conversation is worth having. Honor your practice. Enter nature. La.